Hey, YouTubians. This is Archangel for Truth, and my recording for you today is how it was I became a sovereign. Now, I want you to understand something that actually, I was always a sovereign, and so are you. I just didn't know it at that time. And so, this began by my vehicle or my car getting impounded for the first time. Now, to understand, at this time I was still believing everything about the state and following all their regulations and so forth and so you got to understand the process that I had to go through with this situation. So it was at a time when I was uh, struggling financially, and I was wrongfully terminated from the company that I was working for. So, I didn't have the means to pay for renewal of registration and so forth. So, I understood. I had to park the vehicle on private property so it wouldn't get ticketed or anything like that. Well, the problem was that a relative of mine, without my knowledge or consent, had moved the vehicle or the car out onto the street, and as a result, it happened to be on a day that it was a street cleaning day. Now, it was parked on the correct side of the street for the street cleaning, but the problem was that the parking enforcement had license plate readers, which ultimately where they can read a license plate and determine whether a car is currently registered or not. So the parking enforcement issued a citation, a parking ticket. Now, this was the first parking ticket that I had, and there were certainly no outstanding tickets on it. So, again, it was during a time where I still tried to follow things, the way they tell you. But that didn't matter. You see, because the state had a little contract with an impound company to impound cars. And the state was also in the red as regards to its balanced budget. So it was looking for ways to make money, as all states do. They find new ways to tax you and new ways to regulate you so that they could profit from it. So, I had just woken up to find that there was a tow truck trying to back down the street because it's a narrow street, and so the sound of the reversing woke me up. So I went outside to see what was going on. To my surprise, the tow truck was connecting to my car, to my vehicle. And so I went out and tried to explain the situation. But for the parking enforcement officer, it didn't matter. All that mattered was I was the registered owner, and regardless of my financial situation or circumstances, they were going to impound my vehicle. And not just impound it, they were also going to issue me a parking citation. So I refused to allow the tow truck driver to take off with my vehicle. So I got inside my vehicle and I told them to call the police because absolutely refused to have my vehicle taken for something I didn't even do. See, what happened there was I was presumed guilty. See, there was no due process that is supposed to happen. And ultimately, what ended up happening was eventually a policeman came, and he too told me that if I didn't get out of the vehicle, I was to be arrested. You know, he didn't care. He didn't care about my financial situation. He didn't care that I didn't park the vehicle on the street. He was working for the state, earning money for the state, and getting paid by the state. So ultimately for him, it was a win-win. It was a win-win for the parking enforcement and the tow truck. The impound company, they all made money off of my economic hardship, off of my property. You see? So the result of that was, I started, looking to see what it was I could do about it. Because as I said to the police officer, this was nothing more than legalized theft. And that is exactly what it was and what it is. But the problem is, you're just a new person to all these things, and you don't know the laws or whatever that existed, or understand the processes that the state is using to steal from you. Okay? And so I began to research online. And it was at that point that I came across videos explaining these things to me. Videos from individuals like Carl Miller or Eddie Craig or Charlie Sprinkle and many, many others to explain how it is our government was defrauding us. And when I realized more and more, how it was that the state was defrauding us, and how even the judges were manipulating things in favor of the state, when I came to the realization that not only am I being brought before in a courtroom, not only does a judge get paid by the state, not only does a police officer get paid by the state, and the prosecution get paid by the state, that ultimately it's a system meant to make money for the state. It's what it's all about. It's the biggest Ponzi scheme ever. Hell, not only, if that wasn't bad enough, okay, if it wasn't bad enough for them to come up with a system where everybody is against you, they even took away a constitutional court proceeding and put you in a category of not a it's a quasi-civil, quasi-criminal court case. Which really, what it boils down to is they don't adhere to the Constitution. And so, ultimately what it boils down to is this, is the government, when it wants to profit off of you, will find ways and find people that will do so. Now, many in the anti-sovereign movement want to know, what it is that brings people to come into this ideology of sovereignty. Well, ultimately, the founding fathers understood that that each and every one of us are sovereign, and they so expressed that. And so, at the very founding of this nation, it was based upon individual sovereignty, and so, and ultimately, the consent of the governed. These things have changed over time, and even the Constitution is not much help in defending the rights and freedoms of the people of today, because now, the way they have it set up, all the state needs to do is have a compelling reason as to why it's violating your constitutional rights or your inalienable and unenumerated rights. You see? So even the Constitution at this point is not much more than, not worth really the paper it's written on it at this point. So this is what began the process. And ever since, I have learned more and learned varying techniques. And ultimately, the more I've learned, the more I came to realize just how much the judiciary, just how much the state is defrauding the people of their rights. They come up with varying safety reasons, and sadly, there are people who are willing to get paid to ultimately defraud us of our rights. And those individuals typically wear badges, or if they're not wearing a badge, they're wearing a judge's robe. And so, it was that first impound that began me on this process. And it wasn't the last impound, but ultimately I have learned many things ever since, and even how to deal with a vehicle that has been impounded by the state. Ultimately, you got to understand that you have the right of due process, and when your car is being taken, there's no due process there. It's a takings, and ultimately you have to defend it as such, and seek out the remedies allowed by them, because ultimately you can kick and scream and yell and do whatever you want, but ultimately they're the ones with the guns, and they're the ones that are going to use those guns in order to enforce their theft and fraud. And so that's what it boils down to, folks. So I hope that this is helpful for some to understand, how this process began. And begins, with many individuals that are, under the impression that we have certain rights, and then the state comes along and just railroads us as regards to our rights. So, it is what it is, I guess. One other thing I would like to say about the cars that are getting impounded. See, the far majority of individuals whose vehicles are being impounded are a direct result of economic hardships. And so I would say at least 75% of those individuals that have had their vehicles impounded was a result of that. So what that does is that creates a disparagement, um, specifically for low-income people. And so there's supposed to be, I said it one more time, supposed to be equal protection under the law, but there's not. The reality is it's a pay-to-play state profit system. I'll call it state Ponzi system, ultimately to defraud the people. The less you have, the less you know, the more the state will take. And that's what it boils down to. So I'm going to end it here. And I appreciate any likes and, any commentary that you'd like to share. If you agree or disagree or whatever, just be respectful. That's all I ask. I'm not going to take it down if you're respectful. But, I appreciate those people who do like my videos, and even those who disagree. I don't hate anybody. So ultimately, with that, I'm going to close it, and God bless you, and take care.